When I picked up the phone to ask my son Daniel when his wedding would be my daughter-in-law, Vanessa looked me right in the eye and said with a chilling smile, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of from. I want to know how far it's traveled. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. Special people. I, who for 3 years had paid their monthly rent of $500 in the downtown apartment, bought every piece of furniture in their place and filled their refrigerator when they had nothing to eat. I was not a special person. I stood there in the living room of my own condo holding the phone as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, watching my son avoid my gaze, while Vanessa made herself comfortable on the sofa I had bought for them. The pale pink dress I had picked out for her wedding hung uselessly in my closet, along with the new shoes and the illusion of being part of the most important day of my only son's life. I had spent $200 on that dress, thinking about how nice I would look in Daniel's wedding photos in which I would never appear. For weeks, I had planned every detail. I had put money aside to give them $1,000 as a wedding gift. I had called my sister in Chicago to tell her the good news. I had cleaned my apartment from top to bottom, thinking they might come celebrate with me after the ceremony. All of that collapsed in a second with those 4 poisoned words, "only special people." Daniel finally lifted his gaze and said in a rehearsed-sounding voice, "Mom, it was an intimate thing, very small, just the 2 of us and the witnesses. But I knew it was a lie. I saw the photos on social media. I saw Vanessa's parents proudly posing next to the bride and groom. I saw her siblings toasting with champagne. I saw Vanessa's white dress, which I had helped finance with the $800 I had given her last month for her personal expenses. I saw everything I wasn't supposed to see. A week later, exactly 7 days after that humiliation, Vanessa called me with a completely different voice. She was no longer the confident woman who had excluded me from her wedding. Now she sounded desperate, almost pleading. "Elizabeth, the rent is overdue. The landlord is pressuring us and says, if we don't pay this week, he will kick us out. You forgot to make the transfer." Her voice trembled slightly, as if the world were ending. I was silent for a few seconds, remembering all the times I had rushed downtown to make that transfer. All the times I had canceled my own plans to make sure they had a roof over their heads. All the times I had eaten beans and rice so I could give them money for their desires. And now, after they had excluded me from the most important moment of their lives, they had the audacity to call me as if nothing had happened. Vanessa. I said with a calm that surprised even me, "Didn't I warn you that I only help special people?" The silence on the other end of the line was so deep that I could hear my own heart beating. For the first time in years, it was not I who was trembling, but her. "Elizabeth." "I don't understand," she stammered. "We were always special to you. You're like a second mom to me." Lies. All lies. Wrapped in that sweet voice she only used when she needed something. The same voice she had used to ask me for money for the wedding dress for the honeymoon, for the rings which I had helped finance, without knowing I would never see the ceremony where they were exchanged. For so many years I had this constant feeling of walking on eggshells, weighing every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping to get a crumb of affection from my own son. I was the perfect mother, the obliging mother-in-law, the silent provider who never protested when they treated me like I was invisible. But that phrase, "only special people," awakened something in me that had been dormant for far too long. I had calculated in my head how much money I had spent on them in those 3 years. Between rent, food gifts, emergencies, and whims, it was over $20,000. $20,000 I had taken from my retirement, from my savings, from the money my late husband had left so I could live my last years in peace. And what was all that for? To be treated like a stranger on my own son's wedding day. That night after I hung up, I sat on my bed and cried. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of anger, of accumulated frustration, of years of silently endured humiliation. I cried for all the times they made me feel that my love was a burden, my presence, a hindrance, my money, the only thing I had to offer. I cried for the foolish mother I had been, for the woman who had lost herself trying to be indispensable to those who considered her dispensable. When I woke up the next morning, something inside me had changed. It was not just the pain of betrayal, it was something deeper, colder. I stood up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The same tired eyes as always, the same wrinkles that told stories of years of giving love without getting it back. But there was something else in my gaze, a hardness I didn't recognize, a determination that had been buried under years of compliance. I went to the kitchen and made coffee as I had every morning for 40 years. But this time, I didn't think about calling Daniel to ask how he had slept. I didn't check my phone in anticipation of a message from him apologizing for the previous day's humiliation. For the first time in a long time, I was my own first concern of the day. I sat at the table where I had so often planned surprises for them, counted bills for their expenses, and cried silently when they treated me with indifference. Now this table would be a witness to something completely different. I took out my checkbook, my bank statements, and started to do the math. I wanted to see in exact numbers the extent of my own foolishness. Monthly rent of $500 multiplied by 36 months was $18,000. Food and supplies, approximately $200 a month, was another $200. Birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, anniversary gifts, at least $3,000. Vanessa's medical emergencies, $800. The car loan they never paid me back, $2,500. The air conditioner repair in their apartment, $600. The living room furniture, $200. $33,400. That was the exact sum of my generosity. $33,400 I had wasted from my husband's inheritance, from my pension, from the savings I had put aside penny by penny for decades of honest work. All that money thrown out the window to keep two adults comfortable who couldn't even pretend to respect me. The phone rang and I saw Daniel's name on the screen. Normally, my heart would have pounded as I ran to answer, hoping he would finally apologize and explain that everything had been a misunderstanding. But this time, I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Finally, it fell silent, and I continued drinking my coffee as if nothing had happened. I had already endured humiliation. I had already heard the cruel words, "Only special people were invited." I had already sat at my own kitchen table watching the numbers add up to more than $33,000, all of it drained from the life savings my late husband left me. And I had already taken the first bold step, canceling the transfers, locking the gates of my generosity forever. But nothing prepared me for what came next. It was early afternoon, the city streets buzzing below my high-rise apartment. I had just poured myself a second cup of coffee, the kind I now savored for myself, instead of drinking in haste before rushing to the bank for yet another transfer to Daniel and Vanessa. For the first time in years, I was breathing freely. My money, my choices, my life. That's when I heard the sound. Keys rattling at the door. At first I thought it was a mistake. But no, the door swung open, and in walked Daniel, my only son, his wife Vanessa at his side, and a tall stranger in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. My blood froze, then boiled. Mom Daniel said, his voice soft, too soft, the same tone he used as a boy when he'd broken something and didn't want me to scold him. "We need to talk." The stranger stepped forward and introduced himself as Mr. Conrad Fisher, a family attorney. Vanessa, arms folded, wore that practiced look of false concern that I had seen too many times. "What is happening here?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended, sharper than a whip crack. "We're worried about you." Elizabeth, Vanessa said sweetly, venom dripping under every syllable. "You've been acting strangely, cutting us off financially, installing cameras, changing locks. That isn't normal." And then I realized what they were doing. They weren't just here to ask for money. They were here to take it, permanently. Mr. Fisher pulled out a stack of papers. "Mrs. Richter, your children are concerned about your mental well-being. They believe it would be in your best interest to sign a temporary power of attorney. Daniel and Vanessa would handle your accounts until things settle. My hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. How dare you go through my life as if I were a senile fool, I spat, grabbing the papers and throwing them straight into the trash. These are my accounts, my savings, my blood and my husband's memory. And you, I pointed at Daniel. My finger trembling with rage. You are not my caretaker. You are a grown man who should be ashamed to beg from his mother. Daniel's face hardened. Mom, stop this. We're trying to help. Help. I laughed bitterly. By breaking into my home with a lawyer in tow. By treating me like I'm already dead and you're carving up what's left. The apartment filled with tension so thick it could suffocate. For years I had bitten my tongue, swallowed my pride, convinced myself that love required sacrifice. But in that moment I was no longer the mother desperate for scraps of affection. I was a woman betrayed, and I had fire in my veins. Get out. My voice rang against the walls of the apartment louder than I thought possible. What they didn't know was that earlier that week I had installed a small voice recorder under the dining table. On the advice of my neighbor, Helen Brooks, I had begun documenting everything. And now, as Conrad Fisher calmly explained that family intervention was normal, that elder confusion was common, every word was being captured. Proof. Evidence. Daniel's eyes darkened. Mom, you can't just cut us off. We have obligations, the rent, the car payments, the credit cards you co-signed. You owe it to us. Oh, I hissed, stepping forward, shaking with fury. I owe you nothing. I paid your rent for 3 years. I filled your refrigerator when I had nothing myself but beans and rice. I bought your furniture, your wedding dress, your damned honeymoon. And what did I get in return? Only special people were invited. That's what I got. Vanessa paled, then lunged into her performance. Tears welled up instantly, her voice trembling as she reached for my hand. Elizabeth, we love you. We just think you're not well. Please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I yanked my hand away as if her touch were fire. Do not call this love. Love doesn't demand signatures on legal documents. Love doesn't exclude a mother from her only child's wedding. That's when Vanessa pulled an envelope from her purse and tossed it onto my coffee table. If you refuse to cooperate, she said, her tears gone, now replaced with icy triumph. We'll have no choice but to file for guardianship. You won't be able to access your money without Daniel's approval. I stared at the envelope, at the thick set of documents inside, and felt a wave of rage so strong I could have torn the city skyline apart. They weren't just here to humiliate me. They were here to erase me. I rose slowly, my body trembling with indignation, but my voice steady as iron. Then you'd better get ready for war, because I will never, never sign away my freedom. The apartment was silent. My son, my flesh and blood stood glaring at me as if I were the enemy. Vanessa's lips curled into a sneer. Conrad Fisher gathered his papers with professional calm, as if this was just another transaction. You'll regret this, Daniel muttered, his voice low and dangerous. No, I said, meeting his eyes with a fury I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in my life, I will not regret standing up for myself. I opened the door and pointed to the hallway. Out, all of you. Leave my home before I call the police. They hesitated. Then one by one, walked past me, their dignity fractured, but their greed undimmed. Vanessa turned at the door, her voice sharp as a knife. This isn't over, Elizabeth. We'll see you in court. Perfect, I shot back. Bring your lies, your threats, your crocodile tears. I'll bring the truth, and the truth always wins. When the door slammed shut, I was left alone in the quiet of my apartment. But it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of freedom, of rage, turned into resolve. For the first time in decades, I felt the fire of my own will blazing like a torch in the night. I knew then that the battle was only beginning. and I was ready. That day, I learned something vital. The greatest betrayal isn't from strangers, but from those who carry your name and still treat you as expendable. I had lost the illusion of family, but I had gained something more powerful myself. And to those of you listening, I want to ask, what would you do if your own child tried to take away your freedom? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear them. I thought the worst was over when I forced Daniel and Vanessa out of my apartment, their lawyer trailing behind like a vulture denied a carcass. But I was wrong. Their greed had not ended at my doorway, it was only gathering strength. The following week, the air in my apartment felt heavy. Every sound from the hallway set my nerves on fire. Was that the elevator? Were they coming back? Panic slithered into my chest each time my phone rang. Still under that fear burned something sharper than ever before, an awareness, a clarity. I could see their plan unfolding step by step as if the script had been handed to me in advance. And then the doorbell rang. Through the new security camera feed on my phone, I saw a young woman in a professional blazer holding a folder. She smiled politely, but something in her eyes told me this wasn't a friendly visit. "Good morning, Mrs. Richter," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Miss Caroline Hale, a social investigator with the Office of Senior Services. We've received a report that you may be in a high-risk situation. I need to conduct a wellness check." My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. A government official. Daniel and Vanessa had escalated. This wasn't just manipulation anymore, this was war. I wanted to slam the door in her face, but I knew that would only make me look unstable. My mind raced. If I refuse, they'll use it against me. If I comply, they'll twist my words. My heart thundered so hard I thought she could hear it through the doorframe. Still somewhere deep inside, a new voice rose, calm, precise. The voice of survival. "Stay sharp, be polite, but protect yourself." "May I see your ID?" I asked. Forcing my voice to remain steady, she showed me the badge. It looked official enough. "May I come in?" "Yes," I said, though my inside screamed otherwise. As she stepped into my living room, my eyes darted to the coffee table, where I had left my late husband's folder of bank records. A sudden surge of panic nearly sent me fainting. If she saw those papers highlighted, underlined with angry red ink, would she think I was obsessive? Would she mistake clarity for confusion? I slid the file under a cushion while her back was turned, my hands trembling but swift. "Ms.?" Hale sat down and opened her folder. "Mrs. Richter, we've had reports that you've shown erratic changes in your financial behavior, that you've cut off contact with your family, that you've become paranoid installing unnecessary security systems." I clenched my fists and my lap nails digging into my palms. Every word was a dagger, each one carrying the shape of Vanessa's tongue. "I'd like to ask you some questions," she continued. "Not without my lawyer," I said, firm despite the storm inside me. "This isn't a legal interrogation, ma'am. It's just a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide, there's no problem." Her phrase stung like acid. "If you have nothing to hide." That was the language of abusers, the justification of invaders. My fear twisted into clarity. So I picked up the phone and called Dr. Anton Weber. Within 20 minutes, he arrived, his presence grounding me like a steel anchor in rough waters. He checked her credentials, his jaw tightening. "Miss Hale, unless you have a court order, my client will not answer further questions, but we've had concerning reports from her family." "Yes?" Weber interrupted the same family that excluded her from their wedding while draining over $30,000 of her savings, the same family that stormed her apartment with a lawyer and tried to force a power of attorney. Which story sounds more concerning to you? Ms. Hale shifted uncomfortably. She looked at me, then back at Weber. Right then, my phone began to buzz on the table. The caller ID flashed a number I didn't recognize, but I knew it was them. Daniel, Vanessa. Perhaps both. I let it ring. It rang again and again. The persistence filled the room like a siren, feeding my panic but also proving my point. Their obsession was palpable, undeniable. Weber seized the moment. "You see, Ms. Hale." That phone has rung a dozen times a day since she cut them off. Not with calls of love, not to ask how she's doing, but to harass, to pressure, to frighten. Ms. Hale scribbled notes, her face losing confidence. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My voice surprised even me, clear, strong. "Ms. Hale, let me tell you something. I raised my son alone for 35 years after my husband died. I worked every day, paid every bill, never missed a tax payment. My home is clean, my mind is sharp, my bank accounts are in order. If I am guilty of anything, it is of loving too much and giving too much. But confusion, incompetence. No, I am clearer now than I have been in decades." Silence. Ms. Hale glanced at Weber, then at me. Finally, she closed her folder. "Based on what I've seen today, I will not pursue further action. This case will be closed." The relief that washed over me was almost dizzying. My knees shook as I stood, a tremor of panic releasing into the air. I had stared down the very threat of being declared unfit to live my own life, and I had survived. But I knew with terrifying clarity that Daniel and Vanessa would not stop here. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the panic returned in waves. But along with it came something stronger, clarity sharpened by survival. They would try again, I was certain. They had tasted dependence for too long to give it up easily, and next time they would come with sharper teeth. I placed the recorder under my bed, checked the locks twice, and whispered to the darkness, "I am not done fighting. I want to ask you, those of you listening right now, what would you do if your own children tried to use the law to take away your freedom? Tell me honestly in the comments. I truly want to hear your voices." The night after the wellness check, I barely slept. Fear lingered, yes, but it had transformed into something else, something steel hard. Panic had burned itself out, leaving behind the sharp edge of resolve. If they wanted war, I would not cower. I would plan. I would act. For decades, I had let life carry me like a leaf in a storm, bending to every demand, surrendering to every plea. Not anymore. Now every breath was fueled by one decision: I would protect myself at all costs. At sunrise, I brewed a pot of coffee, the aroma filling my apartment like a soldier's bugle before battle. The city stirred awake below, but I was already in motion. My dining table became a command center. Bank statements, receipts, and notes spread out before me like a general's maps. Document everything Anton Weber had told me. And so I did. Every rent payment, every grocery bill, every holiday gift. The cruel arithmetic of my misplaced generosity stared back at me. $33,400 over 3 years. I wrote the number in bold red ink across the top of a clean page. $33,400. The cost of my silence. I opened a brand new black notebook, one I had bought years ago but never used. On its first page, I wrote the date and the words, "The war for my freedom." Every call from Daniel or Vanessa, every unexpected knock at the door, every neighbor's comment, I logged it all. The notebook became my shield. If they wanted to twist my story, I would have proof written in my own hand. By mid-morning, I called Weber. I want every legal defense prepared. Guardianship power of attorney inheritance disputes. I want to know my rights before they try anything else. He chuckled, softly impressed. "Mrs. Richter, you're moving faster than most clients." "Good. We'll need that spirit." But I wasn't done. I called my neighbor, Helen Brooks. "Can you come over? I need a witness." Within half an hour, she was in my living room, her kind eyes filled with quiet strength. I showed her the notebook. "They want to paint me as unstable," I explained. "This is my insurance, but I'll need people who can vouch for me." "Will you?" Helen didn't hesitate. "I went through something similar with my own daughter. I'll stand with you." Her words lit a fire in me. For the first time in years, I felt part of a true family, one built on choice, not blood. That afternoon, I walked into a hardware store, the same one where I had bought light bulbs for Daniel and furniture polish for Vanessa. But this time, I wasn't shopping for them. I need the best locks you've got, I told the clerk, and I want to speak to whoever installs security systems. The clerk raised his eyebrows but nodded. Soon, his son Ethan appeared, a tall young man with calloused hands and an honest face. I need cameras inside and out, I said. Motion sensors, door alerts. If a mouse sneezes in this building, I want to know. Ethan grinned. We can do that. When tomorrow morning, no delays. Before heading home, I stopped at the bank. The manager, Mr. Klein, looked surprised to see me twice in 1 week. This time I said firmly, I want a safe deposit box, and I want my most important documents moved there immediately. My will, my insurance, my husband's letters. No one but me and my lawyer gets access. He nodded, clearly impressed. You're taking the right steps, Mrs. Richter. I felt a rush of control as the steel door closed behind my papers. For the first time, they were safe from prying hands. By the end of that day, exhaustion pressed on my shoulders, but it wasn't the exhaustion of despair. It was the tired satisfaction of a woman who had finally stopped running and started fighting. I sat in front of the mirror that evening, staring at my reflection. For years, I had seen only the weary widow, the desperate mother clinging to scraps of affection. But now, I saw something else. A woman with fire in her eyes. Determination etched across every line of her face. They won't take me down, I whispered to my reflection. Not Daniel, not Vanessa, not anyone. Late that night, the phone rang again. Unknown number. My chest tightened for a moment, but then I smiled. I wrote the time down in the black notebook, let the phone ring until it died, and turned back to my tea. They could no longer control me with panic. My resolve was iron. Looking back on that day, I realized it was a turning point. Panic had threatened to drown me, but determination pulled me out of the water. I had built defenses, legal, physical, emotional. And though the storm was far from over, I was no longer standing bare in the rain. I was armed, ready. To everyone listening, determination can be stronger than fear. But I wonder, have you ever had a moment when you had to stop being afraid and start taking control? If you have, give this story a like, because your strength matters, and sharing it might inspire someone else to fight back too. By the time the official summons arrived, I already knew it was coming. Daniel and Vanessa would not back down. My black notebook was nearly half filled with dates, calls, and notes. The cameras Ethan had installed caught their car circling the building more than once. I had fortified my home and safeguarded my documents in the bank vault. Yet still, when the heavy envelope from the county court landed in my mailbox, my stomach tightened like a fist. They were suing me for incompetence. I sat at the kitchen table, turning the papers over in my hands. Fear shivered through me, but it no longer controlled me. Beneath it surged another feeling, one I hadn't tasted in years: pride. They could throw every insult at me, drag my name through every courtroom in the city, but they could not take away the truth. I was in full command of my mind, and I would show it to the world. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and dust, the kind of place where fates are decided in silence before a gavel drops. I wore my best black suit pressed the night before with a strand of pearls my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. A battle demanded armor, and this was mine. Beside me walked Anton Weber, steady and calm. "Remember Elizabeth," he said gently. "The burden of proof is theirs. All you need to do is be yourself." I nodded, but my hands still trembled slightly as we entered the courtroom. On the other side sat Daniel and Vanessa, both dressed in dark suits as though this were a funeral. Perhaps it was the funeral of our family bond. Vanessa's eyes locked on mine, cold and unyielding. Daniel refused to meet my gaze. The judge, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, called the session to order. Daniel's lawyer, Conrad Fisher, rose with the calm assurance of a man who had argued dozens of similar cases. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a case of malice, but of love. My clients are concerned for Mrs. Richter's mental state. She has displayed erratic behavior, isolated herself from family, cut off financial support without reason, and become paranoid with unnecessary security measures. Every word was a dagger, meant to pierce my dignity. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, but I did not look down. I sat straighter, lifting my chin. Pride is not arrogance, it is knowing your worth when others try to bury it. Vanessa took the stand first. Tears came easily, her voice trembling. She was like a second mother to me, but recently, she's changed. She's hostile, confused, suspicious of everyone. Her lies slithered through the courtroom like smoke. Anton stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Richter," he said smoothly, "when was the last time you called my client simply to ask how she was?" Vanessa stammered. "Well, I can't remember the Exactly, Anton pressed. "And is it true you told her she wasn't invited to your wedding because only special people were allowed?" The courtroom stirred. Vanessa's face flushed crimson. "That's taken out of context." "What context," Anton asked sharply, "makes those words acceptable to a woman who had paid your rent for 3 years?" Vanessa had no answer. Daniel followed. My heart twisted when I watched him raise his right hand and swear to tell the truth. This was the boy I had raised alone, who once held my hand on the walk to school. Now he said, "My mother has become unstable. She refuses help. We're just trying to protect her from herself." Anton's questions cut clean. "Mr. Richter, how much money has your mother given you in the last 3 years?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know the exact amount." "Would $33,400 sound correct?" Anton pressed. Daniel's silence was deafening, and during that time, Anton continued, "How many times did you visit your mother without asking for financial support?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He had no words. The tension in the room was unbearable, yet pride swelled inside me. The truth was shining even through their lies. Then came a witness I hadn't expected. Mr. Davis, my unpleasant neighbor from across the street, took the stand. My pulse raced. He had never liked me, and I knew Daniel and Vanessa had lured him in. "She's paranoid," he said confidently, "installing cameras like she's under siege, having strangers over at all hours. I've seen her yelling in the street." His words struck like blows. For a moment, fear threatened to drag me under. But then Anton rose. "Mr. Davis, do you know why my client installed those cameras?" "She's paranoid," he repeated stubbornly. "Or," Anton said, leaning in, "was it because her son and daughter-in-law broke into her apartment with a lawyer and tried to seize her financial documents?" The courtroom murmured. "And these so-called strangers, did you ever speak to them?" "No." "So you don't know they are her friends, neighbors, and even professionals supporting her through this abuse?" Mr. Davis faltered. The tension snapped back in my favor. Pride surged through me like fire. Finally, it was my time to take the stand. My legs trembled as I walked forward, but my head was high. I swore the oath, then sat facing the judge directly. Anton asked me to tell my story, and I did. The years of rent payments, the groceries, the furniture, the wedding gifts, the exclusion from their ceremony, the invasion of my home, the manipulation, the threats, the wellness check. I stopped the transfers, I said clearly, because I realized what I was giving was not love, it was fuel for their greed. I am not confused. I am not incompetent. I am a woman who finally found the strength to say no. When Conrad Fisher cross-examined trying to twist my words, I held firm. Every answer was calm, precise. My heart raced with tension, but my pride kept me steady. I was no longer begging to be seen. I was demanding to be heard. After hours of testimony, the judge left to deliberate. The room was thick with silence. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. This was the most tense moment of my life. When he returned, his words cut through the air. "After reviewing the evidence, this court finds no grounds to declare Mrs. Richter incompetent. In fact, the evidence strongly suggests she is the victim of financial and emotional abuse. The petition for guardianship is denied." My breath escaped in a rush. Relief washed over me, followed by pride so powerful it nearly brought me to tears. I had stood my ground. I had not only survived the storm, I had faced it head on and prevailed. Walking out of that courthouse, I did not feel broken. I felt whole. Tension had tested me to my very core, but pride carried me through. Daniel and Vanessa glared, but their eyes no longer pierced me. Their power was gone. To those listening now, there will be times when life squeezes you so tightly that you feel you cannot breathe. But if you hold on to your dignity, if you face the storm with pride, you will come out stronger than before. When the judge's gavel struck and the guardianship petition was denied, the world shifted under my feet. For weeks, I had carried a knot of dread in my stomach, fearing every phone call, every letter, every knock at my door. But in that moment, the weight evaporated. I was free. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized I had stood my ground against my own son and his wife, and I had won. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a victory of the soul proof that dignity still belonged to me. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt like I was stepping into sunlight after years in a cave. The air smelled sweeter. My steps felt lighter. Anton Weber smiled at me like a proud general congratulating a soldier after battle. "You did it, Elizabeth?" he said. "No," I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. "We did it. You gave me the tools." But I gave myself the courage. Behind me, Daniel and Vanessa stood in the shadows, their faces dark with defeat. Vanessa's glare was pure venom, but it no longer pierced me. Daniel's eyes flickered with something like regret, but I no longer hungered for it. Their approval, their love, it was no longer my oxygen. That evening, Helen Brooks insisted on hosting a small gathering at her home. "You need to celebrate," she said. "Tonight isn't about fear, it's about joy." Her cozy living room glowed with soft lamplight. A few of her friends came: Cynthia from the salon, Alfreda from the garden club, Maria and Carmen. Women who knew what it was like to be tested, to be used, to be underestimated. They toasted me with glasses of red wine. To Elizabeth, Alfreda said, her voice ringing with conviction, "To courage, to dignity, and to freedom hard won." The room erupted in cheers. For the first time in years, laughter bubbled out of me unrestrained. It filled the room, mingling with theirs, a sound I thought I had lost forever. Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Helen pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. "Open it when you're alone," she whispered. Back at my apartment, I sat at the table, still warm with the glow of wine and laughter. I tore the envelope open carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter, not from Helen, but from her daughter. "Mrs. Richter," it began, "my mother told me everything. She said you stood against your own son to protect your freedom. I want you to know how much that inspires me. Too many of us stay silent when our families take advantage. You've shown us it's possible to say no and to survive it." My tears spilled freely. It wasn't just my battle anymore. My story had become a spark for others. That knowledge filled me with a joy so fierce it almost hurt. The next morning I woke, not with dread, but with eagerness. The day was mine. I brewed coffee without rushing, savored each sip, and then made a list. Not for Daniel, not for Vanessa, for me. Visit the travel agency downtown, book an art class, call Diana in Chicago just to talk, not about money, but about life. Simple things, yes, but to me they were triumphs. At the travel agency, I flipped through glossy brochures, Paris, Rome, Barcelona. For years, I had told myself I couldn't spend the money because Daniel and Vanessa needed it. Now I realized it wasn't selfish to dream. It was survival. I booked a trip to Italy for the following spring. As the agent handed me the receipt, I laughed with sheer delight. My hands shook, not with panic, but with anticipation. That afternoon, I went to the cemetery to visit my husband's grave. For months, guilt had kept me away. I had poured his hard-earned savings into people who didn't respect me. Kneeling by his headstone, I whispered, "Robert, I did it." I stood up to them. I thought I was losing myself, but I found my strength again. A soft breeze brushed my cheek as if in answer. My heart swelled, not with sadness this time, but with joy. When I returned home, I stood at my balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, crisp, filled with promise. My heart beat fast, not from fear, but from excitement. I was 71 years old, yet I felt more alive than I had at 40. The victory wasn't just legal. It was emotional, spiritual, transformational. I had proved to myself that I wasn't helpless, that I wasn't a burden, that I still had power over my own life. Joy surged through me so intensely that I began to laugh loud and uncontrollable, the kind of laugh that shakes your whole body. And then to my surprise, I began to dance alone in my living room, spinning slowly to music only I could hear. For once I wasn't waiting for anyone to love me. I was loving myself. Looking back, I realized part 4 was about tension and pride. But part 5, this part, was about release, about joy so powerful. It split me open and poured light back into the cracks of my soul. I had feared being alone. But in truth, being alone with dignity is better than being surrounded by people who only want your money. To all of you listening, victory isn't just about winning a court case. It's about reclaiming your life, your choices, your joy. And I wonder, have you ever had a moment when relief turned into joy, when you realized you were finally free? I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments, I'll be reading them. It had been 3 months since the judge's gavel gave me back my freedom. In those 90 days, the shape of my life had transformed completely. Where once my mornings began with fear, dreading a call, an intrusion, or another plea for money, they now began with something simpler, something sweeter. Hope. The kind of hope that rises with the sun, bright and steady, not rushed or desperate. I felt it in my chest each morning when I brewed my coffee. I felt it in the calm silence of my new apartment downtown, far from the echoes of Daniel and Vanessa's demands. I felt it when I looked at the black notebook now tucked away in my desk, no longer a record of threats, but a testament to my survival. I had not only won, I had been reborn. After selling my old house, I moved into a bright 2-bedroom apartment near the city center. The walls were freshly painted in warm cream sunlight poured through the wide windows, and from my balcony I could see the river glistening like silver in the distance. It was smaller, yes, but it was mine, and every corner felt light, unburdened by ghosts of arguments and demands. Each day I set a routine not out of obligation but out of joy. Mondays I painted. Wednesdays I joined Helen and the garden club women for lunch. Fridays I walked by the river watching children play and remembering that once long ago Daniel had been that small boy who believed I hung the moon. The ache of loss was still there, but the peace that followed it was stronger. One morning, Helen invited me to a local center for seniors. "Come with me," she said, "you need to see this." Inside the modest building, I found a circle of men and women my age, sipping tea and sharing stories. Some had been abandoned by children, others had faced legal battles like mine. What connected us all was resilience. I listened quietly at first, then shared my story. When I spoke about the trial, the betrayal, and the victory, I saw eyes shining with recognition. One man leaned forward, his hands trembling. "You gave me courage," he whispered. "I've been afraid to cut off my son. But hearing you, maybe I can do it." In that moment, I realized my battle was not mine alone. It was a lantern lighting the way for others. So I joined the group as a volunteer, helping others document their finances, guiding them to lawyers, and most of all, reminding them that they deserved dignity. Each time I left the center, my heart burned with hope. Hope that maybe my story could protect someone else before it was too late. Hope that the cycle of exploitation could be broken one brave no at a time. Hope, too, for myself that I could live the years I had left not in fear but in freedom. One spring afternoon, I returned to the cemetery where my husband Robert rested. This time, I did not come heavy with guilt. I came with lightness in my steps. "Robert," I whispered, kneeling beside his stone. "I've started living again. I thought losing our son meant losing everything, but I've found strength I didn't know I had, and I've found friends who remind me life still has meaning." The breeze stirred the leaves, and for the first time I felt not sorrow but calm, as though he were telling me, "It's all right. Live, Elizabeth. Live." That night I sat on my balcony as the city lights flickered on one by one. The river reflected the glow like a ribbon of gold. I sipped my tea, breathing in the evening air. There was no ringing phone to dread, no sudden knock at the door, just silence, warm and steady, wrapping itself around me. And I realized this was the greatest gift of all. Not the legal win, not even the financial independence, but the serenity of knowing I was safe and the gentle joy of looking ahead without fear. The future stretched out before me like an open road. I had already booked my trip to Italy, the one I'd dreamed about for decades. I had signed up for an art exhibition next fall where I would hang my paintings for strangers to see. And at the volunteer center, I had agreed to mentor 3 women beginning their own fights for freedom. At 72, my life was not winding down. It was opening up. Part 4 had been tension and pride. Part 5 had been joy and release. But Part 6, this part, was about hope. Burning, radiant hope tempered by serenity. I had lost illusions, yes, but I had gained truth. And truth was lighter to carry. I had discovered that it is better to walk alone with dignity than to be surrounded by people who chain you with manipulation. And in that discovery, I had found peace. To all of you listening, my story is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever been underestimated, controlled, or betrayed, and who still found the courage to reclaim their life. I want to ask you, have you ever felt that moment when peace replaced fear, when hope lit up the darkness? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if my journey has touched you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories yet to come. Hit the bell, leave your thoughts, and be ready for the next chapter, because there are more stories of resilience and freedom waiting for you.